In the early decades of the 20th century black show business world, Bessie Smith stood like a storm on legs, a legend, a booming voice, a temper that could cut a room in half, and a life wrapped in whispers and scandal. Yet behind that voice echoing across tent shows and dusty Southern theaters, there were said to be a series of forbidden affairs with women, relationships so dangerous that they were buried in silence for nearly 100 years. According to files later reported to have surfaced from post-war archives, Bessie was romantically entangled with 6 female artists, women who were not only famous, but feared. Some were believed to have broken their lovers' arms in jealous rages. Some were said to have planted lies like landmines. Others allegedly manipulated reporters and destroyed evidence inside church walls. This was the underside of music, love, and betrayal, a hidden record of intimacy and cruelty. And the names connected to Bessie in those documents were enough to leave even hardened historians stunned. Bessie Smith once uttered a sentence that, according to those who preserved it, still hangs like a curse over generations of black female performers. She reportedly said, "I'm not afraid of men betraying me. I'm afraid of women saying they love me and then turning that into a weapon." She said those words in the summer of 1925, right in the middle of a chain of strange incidents that nearly wiped out her career. And the one figure many suspected to be orchestrating the storm was the same woman Bessie had once called her mentor, her big sister, and her first lover. Ma Rainey, the woman widely revered as the mother of classic blues, was more than a touring star in sequined gowns. She sang about same-sex desire when society still tried to outlaw it. She traveled the Southern circuit with the Rabbit-Foot Minstrels, pulling crowds into tents with a voice that sounded like it had been soaked in smoke and sorrow. And in 1923, as the story goes, she spotted a struggling Bessie Smith singing in a dim, stale-smelling bar in Georgia, snatched her out of that shadow-soaked room, and pushed her under a real spotlight. But the way Ma rescued Bessie planted something else too, a seed of control that would grow into something much darker. It was said that they shared a cramped apartment on Auburn Avenue in Atlanta from March 1924 through the summer of 1925. On nights when the tour schedules twisted Bessie's nerves so tight she couldn't sleep, Ma would pull her close, holding her like a child who'd woken from a bad dream, and whisper in her ear, "Every song you sing is a breath I taught you. Don't forget that." Those words sounded tender, but they wrapped around Bessie's ribs like a band. Because once Bessie began to rise, writing her own songs, planning her own sessions, speaking up in meetings, Ma's role quietly shifted. She stopped acting like a lover and began moving like a supervisor who owned the room. Every new track Bessie drafted, every lyric she scribbled on hotel stationery, Ma dissected it, line by line, note by note, as if nothing belonged to Bessie alone. Things finally snapped on the afternoon of the 11th of August 1925. Ma walked into their space carrying a folded sheet of paper, a handwritten artist agreement. The words on it, according to a Backstage account, were not promises. They were conditions. The agreement reportedly demanded that every recording, every live performance, every musical arrangement involving Bessie Smith had to be reviewed and approved by Ma Rainey before it could be heard in public. Bessie didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply folded the paper back up, set it carefully on the table, and turned her body away, as if turning away from a verdict. A Backstage manager who claimed to witness that moment later said Ma's eyes looked like thunder right before it splits the sky, silent but lethal. 5 days later, rumors began oozing through Georgia's promoter circles like spilled poison. No one could say where they started, no one could point to the first mouth that spoke them, but the rumors were sharp, specific, and cruel. The whispers said that Bessie Smith had contracted syphilis in 1921 and that it was flaring up again. Bits and pieces of that story drifted into theaters in Macon and beyond. An anonymous typewritten letter reportedly landed in the hands of Savannah show organizers, warning, "Consider strict medical checks if you don't want to be liable for infections in a closed venue." No one dared confirm the accusation. No one confronted Bessie directly. The halls stayed polite, but cold. And yet the consequences hit like a hammer. Within 10 days, 4 of Bessie's biggest shows were canceled quietly, without any official explanation. Contracts simply dissolved into silence. On the 1st of September 1925, Bessie Smith walked alone into Grady Memorial Hospital. She sat in a crowded, low-ceilinged waiting room, the smell of antiseptic and floor cleaner clinging to the air. There was no manager beside her, no lawyer, no call placed to Columbia Records. When the nurse finally approached, all Bessie reportedly said was, "I'm here to kill a lie." When the doctor offered her a full examination, a proper medical report to set the record straight, Bessie turned it down. Paperwork wouldn't give her what she needed. She didn't come for a diagnosis. She came for a name. Because in her mind, only one person could have fed the rumor the details it carried Ma Rainey. Not because anyone had shown Bessie evidence, not because a witness had stepped forward, but because of one detail that cut too close. Back in early 1921, while touring Texas, Bessie had undergone a private dermatological treatment. It never appeared in official documents. The only person who knew the specifics had been lying next to her in bed. And just a few weeks before the rumor hit, during a tense backstage argument in Atlanta, Ma had thrown a line at her like a knife, saying with bitter irony, "You think your fans would still kiss that mouth if they knew what it once caught?" That sentence didn't just sting, it lodged itself in Bessie's memory like a thorn she could never pull out. After the scandal, Bessie disappeared from public stages for nearly 2 months. Columbia Records dressed it up as vocal rest, a polite, careful phrase. But those close to her knew better. They watched her try to stitch her trust back together night after night, as if she were mending a torn costume seam that kept splitting open. The syphilis rumors eventually drifted away. No medical files were ever released. No proof was ever published. But Bessie came away with one conviction carved into her bones. A rumor, if timed right, can kill a life faster than any truth. Ma Rainey left Atlanta and went back to touring through southern towns, her train ticket punched by new hands, her posters pasted in new cities. She was never seen standing at Bessie's side again. No more shared hotel rooms. No more late-night duets of C.C. Ryder that once made theaters roar. Their relationship ended the way many of the most dangerous ones do, quietly, but with scars that never fade. 14 years later, in December 1939, Ma Rainey died in a cold house in Columbus, Georgia. There was no grand funeral, no parade of industry tributes, no endless flowers from record executives. An elderly neighbor later recalled that Ma had spent her last 3 years refusing to look into a mirror, taping over the glass as if she were afraid of the haunted face that might stare back. In certain black lesbian circles, her name slowly became attached to a kind of curse. The woman who, people said, had pushed Bessie Smith into darkness with nothing more than a whispered threat. As for Bessie, those who heard her after that ordeal said her voice grew rougher, more jagged around the edges. Like every note in downhearted blues was a fist connecting with the jaw of a betrayer. She never spoke Ma's name again. Not on stage, not in interviews, not in song lyrics. The silence held until 1936, when she wrote to a close friend and left one cold line on the page. "Some people say they love you just to use your past like a whip." And so, when a newly uncovered private list revealed the women Bessie believed had made her feel both fiercely loved and savagely wounded, the very first name she reportedly marked down was Ma Rainey. Not because of their sex, not because of the nights they shared, but because Ma had turned one private secret into a weapon and, in Bessie's eyes, nearly killed her career at the precise moment it burned the brightest. If Ma Rainey was the first thunderclap that shaped the sound of black women's blues, then Ethel Waters was the first blinding Hollywood spotlight ever turned on a black woman who had clawed her way out of the gutter. Born in 1,896 inches, Chester, Pennsylvania, raised in relentless poverty, assaulted at 13, Ethel never truly trusted love. What she trusted was survival. With a voice that cut straight through the room and a face that could turn to stone on camera, she climbed from lounge singer to the first black film star invited to speak inside the White House. By the 1,930 seconds, the public crowned her the first black queen of the silver screen. Ethel herself preferred another identity, a woman redeemed by faith. She reportedly attended church multiple times a week and, according to financial records, donated more than $20,000 in 1931 to a Harlem congregation. In front of reporters, Bible held high, she once declared that faith had rescued her from her past and from women like Bessie Smith. But what never made it into print was the allegation that Ethel had once shared not just a hotel suite with Bessie in Chicago, but long nights where faith was set aside and flesh spoke louder. Their story, as reconstructed from diaries and secondhand testimony, began in early December 1931, when both women performed at a charity event at the Chicago Civic Opera House. After the show, Bessie was supposed to head back to her own hotel. Instead, Ethel's assistant unexpectedly invited her to stay at an uptown apartment. Ethel kept under a long-term lease, a private retreat she used to escape the noise. Bessie reportedly hesitated, but once she stepped inside, felt the warmth of a lit fireplace, caught the faint aroma of church incense, and heard melancholy music drifting from the record player, she seemed to know she would not be leaving that night. In the early hours of the 12th of December 1931, a diary entry written in blue ink, later attributed to Ethel, painted a disturbing picture. In it, she described seeing a devil in Bessie's eyes, something not simply woman or man, but a naked soul knocking on her door in the dark. On the same page, underlined with an unsteady hand, were words translating roughly to, "I made her kneel before me." The exact context of that phrase has never been confirmed, but its implications have haunted every retelling. No one else witnessed what unfolded in that apartment, but according to a housemaid named Josephine, around 7 in the morning she heard nearly 2 hours of low scripture murmurs blended with crying and strange broken sounds, half sobbing, half mocking laughter. When Josephine quietly opened the living room door a crack, she later claimed she saw Ethel on her knees on the floor, head bowed over a Bible laid carefully on an armchair. Beside her stood Bessie Smith, expression carved in stone, arms folded, eyes fixed on a painting of a crucified Christ hanging on the wall. Around 8 o'clock, something snapped. Josephine recalled that Ethel suddenly rose, walked to a small altar in the corner, took a bottle of holy water, turned back, and without any warning, splashed it straight into Bessie's face. Ethel shouted that she would not be seen as a weak-hearted woman, that her body was meant for Christ, not as a refuge for desire. The chill that filled the room, Josephine later said, did not come from Chicago's December air. It came from Ethel's voice, hitting every word like a thunderous sermon, as if she were fighting off demons. Bessie didn't argue. She is said to have given a thin, humorless smile, wiped the holy water from her face, picked up her coat, and walked out in complete silence. It wasn't fear that sent her out the door. It was understanding. She had seen enough of people who tried to crush their own instincts with God, and knew that type of woman could be the most dangerous of all. 2 days later, on December 14, a major New Jersey promoter received an unsigned letter. It stated that Miss Smith had a habit of seducing women backstage and frequently tried to stay alone in female performers' dressing rooms after shows. The letter urged the organizers to reconsider her presence for the sake of morality. The note was typed, but the signature at the bottom was handwritten, someone who had once trusted her. Later comparisons of that signature with entries from Ethel's diary suggested the handwriting was nearly identical, down to each curled flourish. Bessie didn't hear this from gossip. She was told directly by the New Jersey organizers when she arrived for rehearsal. They expressed regret, but also informed her that she had been removed from the lineup. They offered no official explanation. There didn't need to be one. A single hint about her supposedly seducing women backstage was enough to slam shut every door she was meant to walk through. Bessie did not explode in rage. Back in the cramped room she was renting, she took the canceled show ticket, turned it over, and wrote a single sentence on the back. Those who later saw it remembered her words as something like, "She didn't have to hit me. She killed me with her prayers." By 1932, the newspapers still showed Ethel Waters smiling at White House events, Bible in hand, radiating devotion. But behind that public image, those near her began noticing private behaviors that were quietly alarming. She reportedly refused to lay a hand on anyone unless she had first sprayed them with holy water. She would not allow male staff to enter her dressing room, claiming some men might actually be women in disguise sent by the devil. "The world is crawling with demons now," she would mutter, according to one account. After 1947, Ethel practically vanished from mainstream entertainment. She turned down major acting offers and chose to sing almost exclusively in churches. She hired a personal pastor to read scripture to her every morning, and she insisted that her household staff wear high-necked clothing even during the summer heat. According to one medical report, a psychiatrist labeled her condition as a form of paranoid dissociative disorder, but no one around her pressed for treatment. Her faith, or what was left of it, had become its own fortress. One last letter from Bessie to her close friend Clara, discovered after Bessie's death, contained a line that has been quoted in hushed tones ever since. Bessie wrote that this particular woman had wanted to touch her and burn her with prayer at the same time. She said she had never seen someone so terrified of themselves that they felt the need to hide beneath God's skirts. By the time Backstage memos were decoded, private letters examined, and fragments of diaries quietly made public, Bessie was already gone. But in that private list where she placed the women who, in her view, had dragged her life through manipulation and spiritual warfare, Ethel Waters sat in second place. Not, it was said, because Ethel physically harmed her, but because she turned every moment of intimacy into a kind of religious courtroom, with Bessie's right to exist as her true self put on trial. And that, more than any rejection, was what Bessie Smith reportedly despised the most, not being turned away, but being lied to under the disguise of salvation. Every time Alberta Hunter's name comes up, most people picture a gentle figure, soft-spoken, kind-faced, her singing as soothing as a lullaby. They remember the woman who performed for wounded soldiers and American troops during World War II, the singer who seemed to move through the world without scandal, without chaos, without ever publicly admitting who she truly loved. But among the items reportedly pulled from Bessie Smith's coat pocket after the 1937 car crash, there was said to be a scrap of paper, words smudged by rain. Only a few legible fragments remained. Paris cabin. She left me. She didn't look back. Alberta was born in 1,895 inches. Memphis, the same era as Bessie, yet her path and temperament seemed to belong to another world. If Bessie was fire-defiant, impulsive, ruled by instinct, then Alberta was quiet water, careful, politely reserved, gliding through rooms like someone stepping out from a church aisle. They first crossed paths in 1,928 inches New York, sharing the bill at Club Duke's, a polished venue where wealthy white patrons sat beside educated black customers. To most observers, these two women seemed like opposite poles, unlikely even to become close friends, let alone share a bed. But according to private notes and whispered recollections, they did more than that. They left America together. By March 1933, the Great Depression was choking the country, and racial segregation was tightening its grip. A special tour was organized to send a group of black artists to Europe to help present the image of a free America. Alberta Hunter was selected to represent the composed, educated black woman, elegant, controlled, refined. Bessie Smith, by contrast, embodied the raw, unvarnished cry of the working class. Initially, the travel manifest placed them in separate cabins on the SS Paris, departing from New York. But that arrangement didn't last long. One stormy night at sea, as the ship heaved on black waves, Bessie, drunk and panicked, woke up screaming from a nightmare. According to accounts, her cries carried down the corridor. Alberta, moved by something deeper than professional courtesy, requested to move into Bessie's cabin to calm her. The two women then spent 12 consecutive nights sharing that small room on the Atlantic. In the private diary of a black dancer named Reggie, who was part of the same troupe, he recalled passing their door at dawn and hearing Bessie giggle, then whisper something like, "You're the only one who can shut me up when I moan." No one can say for certain what happened between those 4 cabin walls, but from the third night onward, Alberta skipped dinner with the group, requesting that tea be brought to the room instead. She began writing letters in French, though no one had ever actually seen her studying the language. She double-locked the cabin door whenever Bessie stepped out, as if the space they shared had become its own hidden world. On the 4th of April 1933, the ship docked at Le Havre. The performers took a bus into Paris and were housed at the Hotel Lutetia, a place that had once sheltered names like Hemingway and Josephine Baker. The performance schedule was tight, demanding, relentless. Yet every night, Alberta and Bessie were seen returning to their room at the same hour, shoulders nearly touching, their silence speaking more than words. For the first 2 weeks, everything appeared to be in balance. Bessie seemed unusually light, almost hopeful. She was drinking less, focusing more. She made a point of dressing well, wearing velvet blouses, dabbing on Alberta's perfume, brushing her hair carefully before leaving the room. Then came the night of April 21. After a performance in Montmartre, Bessie accepted 2 glasses of rum sprinkled with powdered painkillers by a dancer who claimed it would loosen her tense muscles. On the carriage ride back to the hotel, Bessie's hands began to shake. Her sentences slurred, her vision clouded. By the time Alberta got her up the staircase, Bessie's body was no longer cooperating. Witnesses later recalled that Bessie collapsed onto the floor of their room, vomiting, then stiffening, muscles locking in violent spasms. Her hands clenched the bedsheet as if she were hanging off the edge of the world. It was reported that the night receptionist, a man named Joseph Durand, saw Alberta rush downstairs, frantic, asking for cold towels and assistance. But then, according to his statement, she simply never came back. When Joseph went to check the room around 2 in the morning, he found Bessie naked on the wooden floor, the lamp still burning. Her eyes were wide open, her lips cracked and dry, her skin tinted bluish from the cold. Alberta was gone. No coat, no explanation, no note, just absence. Joseph called a doctor and covered Bessie with a blanket. She woke hours later in a hospital bed, disoriented, throat raw, body weak. Nurses later recalled that she asked only one question, 3 times, gripping the sheets as she spoke. "Where is she?" The answer, when it came, was like ice. Alberta had left the hotel that same night, checked into a different place, and told the staff she needed solitude to pray for her sick friend. What haunted Bessie for years afterward wasn't just the fact that Alberta walked out. It was the silence that followed. For nearly 2 decades, no explanation arrived, no handwritten apology, no confession, not a single sentence acknowledging that night existed. From 1934 onward, whenever someone said Alberta's name in Bessie's presence, she reportedly answered with a single line. "The only one who could quiet me when I hurt was the one who left when I needed her most." After the war, Alberta stepped away from the music world entirely. She studied nursing, took a job at Goldwater Memorial Hospital, caring for elderly patients and those dying of cancer. She dodged every question about Bessie, about Paris, about the 1933 tour, or the SS Paris cabin. Interviews that pushed too close were neatly sidestepped or shut down. In public, she was the devoted caregiver, the polite former singer who had traded nightclubs for hospital corridors. In private, according to some staff, there were nights she woke from sleep shaking, whispering words no one understood. One nurse who worked the final shift with Alberta in the winter of 1984 later claimed that in her delirious last hours, Alberta repeated one question 3 times. Did she forgive me? No one in that hospital room could answer. Bessie had died back in 1937 inches, a Mississippi car wreck. On the way to the hospital, witnesses said she was still conscious, still talking, yet she never once spoke Alberta's name. The only strange thing, according to the police inventory, was what they found in Bessie's leather purse. A small square of pale blue silk, folded with care. Embroidered delicately in silver thread were the initials A.H. That tiny handkerchief, clutched by a woman who never got her apology, has led many researchers to believe that somewhere between rage and heartbreak, Bessie held onto Alberta like a scar she never allowed to fully heal. When documents from the 1933 European tour were eventually declassified, and researchers pieced together fragments of ship logs, hotel notes, and private correspondence, a question formed that no one alive could truly answer. Who was Alberta Hunter to Bessie Smith? A guardian angel who held her together in the middle of a storm-tossed ocean? Or the one who walked away on the coldest night of her life and allowed 5 silent decades to swallow the truth? Bessie Smith is no longer here to speak. All that remains is that private list she reportedly left behind. On it, she ranked Alberta third among the 6 women she believed had broken her life apart. To Bessie, that placement was its own verdict, a quiet, final proof that sometimes the gentlest presence, the softest voice, belongs to the person who leaves the deepest fracture. Many people now speak of Sister Rosetta Tharpe as the godmother of rock and roll. In her hands, the electric guitar didn't just sing, it cracked like thunder down church aisles. Her voice fired out like bullets, somehow sacred and sensual at the same time. Part prophet, part seductress, sending chills through congregations with a desire hidden between her notes. But if you had asked Bessie Smith, the woman who once stood beside Rosetta on a secretive gospel recording in 1940, she would not have called Rosetta a godmother of anything. According to those who preserved her private words, Bessie had another title for her: the holiest traitor I ever lay next to. Their story, as reconstructed from studio logs and whispered testimonies, began in September 1940 inside a worn-down recording studio in Brooklyn, New York. The walls were hung with dark burlap for soundproofing, so dusty that the engineer had to wipe the microphone clean before every take. Bessie had been invited by a small label dealing in underground gospel sides. They told her that Sister Rosetta was experimenting with a new strain of gospel, one that brushed dangerously close to the blues. They wanted Bessie, whose voice could sound like Christ crying out at the cross, to lay down backing vocals for a private hymn that would never be played in church. The song's title alone made people uneasy. I Prayed for Her Kiss, a name the composer himself allegedly admitted smelled more of longing than of holiness. In a handwritten memo later found in his journal, sound engineer Harry Besserman noted the session date precisely, the 19th of September, 1940, around 10 at night. He remembered the studio lights dimmed low, only a blinking red lamp glowing behind the glass. Rosetta stood with her guitar, and Bessie stepped so close to the mic that their breath seemed to blend. At one point, Rosetta sang, I Found God Beneath Her Whisper, and Bessie entered a beat later, her voice rough, almost choking, answering, and I prayed between her knees. Besserman wrote that he didn't think they were singing to God at all, they were singing to each other. No one ever officially confirmed what happened when the session ended and the studio door closed. But 4 days later, Bessie was discovered unconscious on the tile floor of a Manhattan hotel bathroom. There were bruises on her neck, but not the kind typically linked to an attack. According to a member of the housekeeping staff, Bessie had returned that night with Rosetta at her side, a reel of the session tucked into the pocket of her robe. By morning, Rosetta was gone, and so was the tape. 2 years later, during Lent in 1942, when Bessie was quietly preparing a return after a long absence, she reportedly told Atlantic Records she wanted I Prayed for Her Kiss released. She insisted it was a prayer that everyone deserved to hear. That request struck at the heart of who Rosetta had become. By then, she was fronting a powerful gospel movement, preaching against what she called the carnal lives of black performers. Logbooks from the label indicated that days after Bessie's request, a group referring to themselves as the Purification Committee broke into the vault and set fire to every master of that track. The break-in occurred on the night of April 1, just 3 days before Easter Sunday, 1942. In the internal investigation that followed, one security guard told management that he had seen Rosetta at the headquarters that very afternoon. She never stepped into the recording booth, never joined a meeting. But blurry hallway footage allegedly showed her standing outside the vault room for nearly 10 minutes, lips moving in what looked like silent prayer. 4 days after the fire, Bessie received a handwritten letter with no name and no return address. The ink was purple, the lines short and sharp. Don't drag me back to the hell I spent half a life escaping. Bessie never wrote back. She never mentioned Rosetta's name in public again. But those who knew her swore that whenever Bessie walked past a church where Rosetta often performed, she would spit on the ground before moving on, as if she were leaving a mark only she could understand. Rosetta, meanwhile, rode the wave of her gospel fame. She taught at revivals, appeared on national television, and was praised as a spiritual icon in black music. Yet, near the end of her life, when diabetes complications forced her into a hospital bed in 1973, Rosetta reportedly asked a nurse a question that left the woman puzzled. "If a song once led me to the wrong kiss, but I sang it with all my faith, is it still a sin?" The nurse didn't know what she meant. She had never heard of the lost track. In 2001, when a broken water pipe flooded Atlantic's old storage space, workers found a rusted reel-to-reel tape, its label smeared but still legible. "I prayed for her kiss." Much of the audio was damaged, warped beyond repair, but enough survived to send chills through the room. Bessie's voice could still be heard, strained and aching, moaning as if clenching onto pain instead of release. Toward the fragmentary end, Rosetta's voice slipped in, low and haunted, whispering, "Amen for the love I must deny." No one can say with certainty why Rosetta did what she did, if she pushed for the song's erasure out of fear of exposure, out of fanatical faith, or because she saw in Bessie a reflection of herself she couldn't bear to face. But one thing was clear in the fragments that survived. Among all the gospel pieces Rosetta had ever sung, this was the one she spent her life pretending didn't exist. And for Bessie, the fact that Rosetta had allowed a piece of music born between them to be hunted down and burned wasn't just another betrayal, it was a curse. A frozen shard lodged in her chest, something that never thawed for as long as she lived. No one, people often said, screamed about love between women the way Big Mama Thornton did into a microphone, like she wanted to devour the feeling whole and crush the room with her bare hands. Her voice once made Elvis Presley bow his head and imitate her phrasing. She was the first to record Hound Dog, a fierce blues force with the build of a linebacker and eyes that always looked half drunk, half hungry, never pretending to be anything other than who she was. But behind every explosive song she roared through smoky bars was a trail of nights soaked in liquor, sex, and out-of-control rage. And at one of the darkest, most fragile turns of that path, she crossed into Bessie Smith's life like a filthy wave, carrying lust, fury, and blood in its wake. It reportedly began in the fall of 1935. New Orleans was drowning in rain that backed up into the sewers, the streets slick with filthy water and the thick smell of whiskey leaking out of every doorway along Iberville Street. Bessie was winding down her final Southern tour, returning to audiences after a long silence stained by rumor and scandal. She was older now, quieter in some ways, but still sang until her throat felt like it was on fire at underground hush-hush shows, the kind you only entered if you knew the password. One of those secret shows was advertised by word of mouth as Ladies' Night of Fire, a midnight event where Bessie held the power to call any woman she wanted onto the stage on one condition: they had to be women, and they had to be brave enough to burn with her. On the night of October 2, a 17-year-old girl named Willie Mae Thornton drifted into New Orleans from Alabama. Boots torn, a half-finished lily tattoo curling along her back. She had never cut a record. No one recognized her name. But that afternoon, when she sang at a small bar, Bessie overheard her. What came out of that teenager's mouth was a raw, guttural howl erupting from a girl who looked built like a wrestler. Bessie didn't ask for her ID. She didn't ask anything. She simply turned to her manager and, according to those present, said, "Tonight, she sings with me." Ladies' Night of Fire raged on until 3 in the morning. The underground room held maybe 40 people at most, but the crowd fell dead silent when the two women stepped up side by side to sing Street Louis Blues. There were no elaborate lights, no full band, just a lone electric guitar and the stomp of shoes on bare concrete pounding out the rhythm. At the final verse, Bessie stretched out the line, "I hate to see that evening sun go down," her voice slowing into something heavy and aching. Big Mama slipped in behind her, wrapped her arms around Bessie's waist from the back, and finished the lyric in a low moan. "'Cause my baby, she done left this town." The lighting tech later told people that what came next was pure chaos. Bessie turned around, grabbed Big Mama's hand, and they tumbled onto the stage carpet together. Skirts hiked up, heads bumping the speaker, laughter spilling out, tangled with moans and breathing so loud the microphone picked up every ragged inhale like a drum. No one in the audience could tell if it was a choreographed stunt or a burst of reckless heat they weren't supposed to see. 10 minutes later, the police broke the spell. Officers kicked the doors open, cut the power, flooded the room with shouted orders, and arrested both women for being improperly dressed in a private space. The incident never appeared in any official newspaper column, but in the Southern underground art circles it spread like legend. People whispered that Bessie had found fire again near the end of her road, and had forgotten that fire doesn't just warm, it burns. The next morning, Big Mama was bailed out first. Bessie, however, spent the night in a hospital bed. Her knee bruised from the fall, her body stiff and sore. It would have been easy to assume that was the end of their brief collision. But what happened the following night, according to those who pieced it together, was the real blow across the heart. On October 3, in the cramped dressing room behind Club Mahogany, Bessie sat sipping ginger tea with a white female drummer from Chicago. They were laughing loud enough to make the walls vibrate. Bessie's eyes lit up as she told old road stories. No one noticed the back door open. Big Mama stepped in without a smile, without a greeting, without so much as a deep breath. She just stared. Then, in a sudden blur, she lunged forward. She seized Bessie's right wrist and twisted it with such brutal force that the tendons made a sound, later described by witnesses, like fabric tearing in slow motion. Bessie didn't scream, she went rigid. The cup slipped from her fingers and shattered. All she said, in a low, steady voice, was, "You thought I belonged to you forever?" No one seems to remember exactly what Big Mama shouted back, only that when security forced their way in, Bessie's wrist was already swelling, turning angry and dark, while Big Mama stood there breathing hard, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched as if she had bitten down on something sharp. They never spoke again after that night. There were no apologetic letters, no backstage conversations, no carefully staged reconciliations. If they crossed each other's path on the street or at industry events, they looked through one another as if the other were a ghost. Still, it was said that for years afterward, Bessie wore a thin leather strap around her right wrist, as though she were hiding a mark she knew would never completely fade, a quiet memorial to the moment Big Mama's hand twisted more than just bone. Big Mama Thornton stayed on this earth nearly 4 more decades. She cut hound dog long before Elvis ever shook his hips to it. But fame, for her, never translated into wealth. She drank relentlessly. Stories circulated of her breaking a girlfriend's nose in a drunken eruption over betrayal. On stage, she sang like she wanted to slice open the crowd and spit out every memory she'd ever swallowed. In 1984, she was found dead in a small rented room in Los Angeles. No family came forward to claim her body. No major funeral was organized. But those who saw her at the morgue noticed one thing on her hand. She still wore a large silver ring, rumored by some to have been a gift from Bessie Smith back in 1935. A promise, people said, that was never meant to be kept. And in the end, that ring was the only tangible relic left from the frenzy between these two women. Women who dared to lie together in front of witnesses on a stage, then were ripped apart by a twist of the wrist the underground never stopped whispering about. And then there was the kiss that, according to later accounts, never stopped echoing inside someone else's mind. People often said no one slept with more partners than Dinah Washington. Yet no affair clung to her the way her obsession did with a woman who had died before Dinah even grew into adulthood, Bessie Smith. When people remember Dinah, they talk about the volcanic voice, the 7 husbands, the public scenes, the jealous explosions right there under the stage lights. But few knew that the one person who made Dinah completely lose control without a screaming match, without a slap, without even touching her as an adult, was the same woman who had kissed her on the forehead when she was just 12. From that moment on, according to her own words, her inner world never went still again. The story, as pieced together from notebooks and old interviews, began in July 1936 at the Paradise Theater in Detroit. Bessie Smith was close to the final stretch of her life. Her voice no longer blasted through walls like it once had, but her stare could still quiet a room filled with strangers. The theater was packed that night. Dinah, still known by her birth name, Ruth Lee Jones, wore a brown striped dress, her hair braided into simple pigtails. Her mother had brought her to the show as a reward for high marks in school. After the curtain fell, they squeezed through the throng, pressing toward the backstage area where women pushed and leaned in, desperate for an autograph, a glance, a shared breath. Dinah stood a little apart, watching Bessie like someone watching a figure step out of a myth. Then, something no one could explain happened. Bessie leaned down, placed a soft, deliberate kiss on the girl's forehead, and then walked away without asking her name, making no small talk, as if she were simply passing through. For Bessie, it may have been a second. For Dinah, it split her life in two. In a private notebook dated 1956, Dinah wrote in heavy black ink that she couldn't remember a single song from that Detroit night. All she remembered was the feeling of Bessie's lips on her forehead, like someone flipping on a switch for desire from a past life. No one but Dinah would ever truly know how deep that lightning strike went. By 14, Dinah had run away from home, turning herself into a bar singer in smoky rooms, drifting between girlfriends and affairs with married men twice her age. Every relationship seemed to end in the same pattern: arguments, chaos, attempts to dominate, followed by a violent kind of walking away. To the outside world, she was just a wild, uncontrollable diva, leaving wreckage behind her. In her diary, though, she wrote a single line that explains more than any headline: "I don't know how to love anyone without wanting to tear them apart." By the 1952, Dinah Washington had become one of the most commanding black blues voices in America. But one strange fact followed her everywhere. She consistently refused to sing any of Bessie Smith's songs. Not in concerts, not in private sessions, not even when the idea could have made her a fortune. When the press asked, when fans pleaded, when her label pushed her to cut an album of Bessie covers, she blocked the idea each time. Her public excuse was always the same: "My voice ain't old enough." Insiders knew her voice could make men leave their families. It could stop a band cold mid-song and make the room hold its breath. But it could not, or would not, reach back to the shadow of the woman who'd kissed her when she was 12. On the night of the 18th of May 1957, during a private Jet magazine party at the Waldorf Hotel, a journalist decided to poke the wound. He brought out a glossy reprint made from a rare negative. In the photograph, Bessie Smith stood on a Detroit stage in 1936, sweat shining on her skin under the lights, eyes locked somewhere out in the sea of faces below. With a smile that didn't quite match his curiosity, the journalist placed the framed photo down in front of Dinah and asked, half joking, "Was that little girl standing somewhere out there?" Dinah was already on her third whiskey. She looked at the photograph for maybe 3 seconds. There was no smile, no witty comeback. Suddenly, she lifted the glass and hurled it directly at the picture. The sound of shattering glass rang out like a bone breaking in a surgical theater. The room froze. Conversations strangled off mid-sentence. The journalist stepped back in shock. Dinah just stared, eyes wide and unfocused, lips shaking as if she wanted to scream something no one would ever be able to fully understand. Later that night, back in her room, she was so drunk she didn't even bother to take off her shoes. An assistant later claimed that before Dinah finally blacked out on the couch, she clutched the broken frame to her chest like a shield and whispered, almost like a prayer, "What did you do to me, Bessie?" 6 years later, on the 14th of December 1963, Dinah Washington was found unconscious in her Detroit bedroom, surrounded by empty sleeping pill blister packs and a half-drunk glass of brandy. The official ruling was an overdose. Inside the drawer of her vanity, police discovered an unsent handwritten letter. The words were shaky, trailing off at the edges. The first half read like an apology to someone unnamed. The second half was a single sentence written 3 times in a row, as if she were carving it into the paper. "I never hated her. I just didn't know how to live after that kiss." These women were not just casual flings orbiting Bessie